I want to ask as well, we've touched on EU a couple of times here, and obviously Albania is now moving ahead with the clusters and the negotiations and things. Now, Albania and Kosovo, I tell my colleagues in Brussels quite often, you know, Albania and Kosovo are the most pro-European countries in Europe. It's over like 95, 96% pro-European. And they're like quite surprised by this. But this is falling a bit, sort of year on year, this level of trust is falling a bit. I don't really know if I believe that Albania is going to be joining the EU anytime soon, and not necessarily because of something Albania's done or not done, because I don't think Bulgaria, Greece, Croatia were particularly ready when they joined. But it's more to do with the political will in the EU. I think that's lacking both at the institutional level and in member states. I mean, in member states, it can change depending on the government, but this is my view at the moment. What's your view on EU accession? Do you think it's realistic, or are we sort of chasing a bit of a pipe dream?
It's a good, hard question, and it sort of takes me back to when when I was going to say when I was young, when it's been a 20+ year chase, right? And I remember when I was in my early 20s, and we would go to workshops, and we would sort of get invited to seminars, and we would talk about the EU, and it was such a dream. And of course, for most of my life, I only had an Albanian passport, so it required a visa to go anywhere. Yes. And I remember very well what it was like, and trying to explain that to my American colleagues, and who just didn't compute what it meant to be a graduate student who wanted to do research in archives all over Europe, but you couldn't get there. You needed to spend a ton of money and a ton of time if you wanted to go anywhere. And the suspicious looks at the airport, always kind of being in. And so this has been a long, hard road. I totally understand that there is a generation that has gone very tired and very wary of it. I said earlier that Europe is also changing all the time. Europe is not a static objective. And so sometimes, Albanians also have to come to terms with that this is no longer chasing the dream of the 1990s. It's something quite different with different challenges demographically. When you look at sort of the demographic challenge in Europe, when you look at kind of what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on, all the different challenges. And so the pro-Western orientation, and here I think you can sort of, you want to acknowledge that Albanian politics has achieved, with all the dysfunction and all the problems and authoritarian tendencies, and more than tendencies, it has sort of tried to invest in keeping that pro-Western orientation alive, as challenging as that is a lot of times, because you got to be realistic. What's the alternative for Albania?
There isn't.
The geopolitical region is such that we see increasing influence from Russia. We see economic linkages between China and a country like Serbia. We see sort of increasing authoritarianism, even within the EU, and certainly in the borderland regions. And so Albanians have had the kind of history, but here's where I want to insist, right, that we got to learn our history, because we think we know the past because we have, we've talked to people, or we've talked to our grandparents, or we've talked to our parents, but we really need to understand the past to appreciate where but the actual serious past, not the half fictional past that Albanians tend to consume. And a lot of times the choices there's a narrow set of choices, and they're not the ideal choices. And so Albanians, I think, are sensitive to this, and they are, in their history in the past, they've had a taste of anti-Americanism, they've had a taste of anti-Western politics, they've experienced, and they've decided that is not the way of the future. But it is a long, hard road. And here is where I also want to turn the spotlight on Brussels, because I feel like over the last couple of years, there's been a waking up moment to the realities of the international order. We'll see where that goes, but it will take years. And so yes. I think this is not, and certainly it's not a solution to long-standing structural problems that Albanians themselves have to.
I mean, look at
confront.
Bulgaria. I've been following what's happening there with their politics. I think they're going for the 7th general election in like 3 or 4 years. They keep making these coalition governments, and then it crumbles, and there's this malevolent Russian influence there constantly, and corruption scandals and coup d'etats within parties, and this is an EU member state, you know? And I mean, that number of governments in such a short time in a precarious society which has that influence also struggles economically. You know, this is, I mean, I don't think they'd be joining the EU today. Albania is certainly being held to higher standards in that regard. So yeah, I think that's a good example of, you know, joining the EU is not going to solve all the problems that Albania has.
No, and in some ways, actually, it's even a bigger. It's a challenge that once you have joined, because they're obviously the EU comes with a set of, you know, assumptions about assistance that you're going to get, access to funding, labor movement, which will be an issue, and young Albanians will the country has already lost substantial numbers of its talented, ambitious, innovative, younger contingent, and that cannot go on forever. I know Albanian politicians tend to sort of prefer to ignore the problem. It's a big problem.
It is.
And so you know, countries like Germany, I'm sure they'd love to get some of those Albanian nurses and IT sector and the engineers and the highly skilled younger Albanians, but you know, again, I sort of want to go back to what is Albania going to be like in 30 years?
Well, yeah, that's the thing, because not only is
what kind of country?
Not only is it people leaving, but those people are not going to have children in Albania, you know, as well. So it's like a double loss. You're losing the person, but you're also losing the next generation from them as well. Those that stay in Albania are not having as many children as they were before as well. So this is a big issue. But then you have immigrants like me turning up and procreating. So maybe it will balance out at some point.
Well, absolutely. And listen, it's you mentioned earlier that it is an attractive place and it's going to keep attracting people who see a future for themselves there. And I come to Albania every year, typically during the summers. It's making me reconsider. So, you know, I would, it certainly is, it does have, you know, for years and years and years, it has had a lot of push factors. But it does have pull factors as well. And I think with smart investment, with visionary leaders who are not only concerned with their petty battles, but with more long-term vision, you know, it is really, really a good, potentially prosperous alternative. And so I think that it's such a small country with so much packed in. And I think that is very, very attractive. And it should be. And I think long term as well.